well. Yes, we will officially begin. So to all those who are here in the Zoom webinar with us, welcome. And anyone that's watching out there on Facebook, welcome as well. My name is Renee. I am the owner and creator of The Crowded Bookshelf, an online bookstore that specializes in author events, hence why we are here tonight. We are very excited. I suppose I should say I'm used to saying we, but it's just me. So I am very excited to welcome Brian Naslund and Carrie Vaughn to this event tonight. These are both Colorado-based authors, so we get to call them local Colorado authors, which I always am very proud of. And we are here tonight to celebrate the release of Theory of a Demon, which is Brian's third book, the final book in his Dragons of Terra series. Very exciting. And Carrie's here as a special guest. She also had a recent release back in June, Questland. And yeah, we're gonna have a great discussion tonight about writing and genres and just generally enjoying a good sci-fi fantasy book. So I'd like to start off, I'll just introduce my authors really quick. So Brian was born and raised in Baltimore, Maryland, and unlike many, got his first taste of fantasy, not from Tolkien and other great writers, but from watching his older brother play video games in their basement. By day, he is the product director for a tech company and first started writing about dragons to escape the crushing boredom of his incredibly long bus commute. And Carrie is perhaps best known for the New York Times best-selling series Kitty Norval, the urban fantasy series, but she has written many other fantastic books, novellas, and short stories, including Bannerless, Martians Abroad, The Ghosts of Sherwood, and her most recent, as I mentioned, Questland. I'll read a quick description of each of the books as well, just in case some of you aren't fully familiar with what they're about. So like I said, Fury of the Demon, it's the last in a trilogy. So the brief description is, the war against Osiris Ward goes poorly for Bershad and Ashlyn. The Witch Queen struggles with her new powers, knowing the secret of unlocking her dragon cord is key to stopping Ward's army. And all the while, with every wound he suffers, Bershad gets closer to losing his humanity forever. But as the war rages on, the exile turned assassin turned hero isn't sure being human is something that he wants. And for Questland, Dr. Adrienne Cox is a literature professor living a happy life in her ivory tower when billionaire Harris Lang hires her to guide a mercenary strike team to his island paradise. Unfortunately for Lang, the designers and engineers hired to construct his island retreat have rebelled. The biggest problem? The mutiny is being led by the chief designer, Dominic Brand, who also happens to be Addie's ex-boyfriend. It's up to her to brew the quelling tensions before the island goes up in flames. Brian and Carrie, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, excited to be here.
Yeah. So I like to start just by sort of, we'll ease us into the discussion with what I like to call author icebreakers. So Brian, we'll start with you since we're here celebrating your book. If you could have tea or a beer, your drink of choice, with any two authors, either living or dead, who would they be?
I've been thinking about this. I feel like my first one would actually be Barack Obama, which is maybe strange for a fantasy author to say, but I love all of his memoirs, and I think he has this like gift for precision in writing that is admirable no matter what you're writing. Also, it's sort of a 2-for-1 thing because he's a former president, and I have questions about Area 51, UFOs, and I feel like maybe not on the first cup of tea would he start spilling the secrets, but like second, third cup of tea, like once he knows that I'm cool, I feel like that I could learn quite a bit about aliens. So yeah, I think it'd be a whole lot of fun. And it's 2, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I feel like this is maybe more the cult of personality around her now, but Mary Shelley, I feel like would be a fun person to have tea with. I mean, I think she wrote Frankenstein when she was like 18 or 19 years old.
Pretty young.
And yeah, when I was 18 or 19, I was writing like Raymond Carver knockoff stories that added like nothing to the world in any sense of it. And Frankenstein, birthed like a whole genre. And I try to think about Frankenstein at least once a week, if not more. So I feel like Mary Shelley would be fun. I feel like it could be one of those tea dates where 72 hours later you're like in Mexico and like you've lost a kidney and you're in a bathtub full of ice, but it was but in a good way. You're like, that was a good experience with Mary, even though she convinced me to lose a kidney somehow along the way. So I feel like that could be fun.
You lost a kidney, but in a good way. I like it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Carrie, what about you?
Yeah, see, I was sort of surprised that like 2 names popped into my head immediately. but I have a feeling if you asked me on different days, it would be a different pair of names every time you asked. But the more I started thinking about the two names that popped into my head, the more intimidated I get, because both of these women are much smarter than I am. So my names are Jane Austen and Ursula K. Le Guin, who I never did get a chance to meet. And like, it's okay. You know, we can't meet everybody that we want to meet. But, you know, she passed away so recently that it's still in my head. And I would love to have tea with them and just get them to talk, like, as long as I don't have to say anything, because there's no way I could compete with all of the wonderful things that I would hope to hear from them. Yeah, I'd either have to like prepare the questions or not be intimidated somehow.
Yeah, just sort of just being like a fly on the wall maybe is the ideal situation.
Yeah, I could just keep feeding them tea and I'll drink and they'll talk and that'll be great.
Sounds like a lovely afternoon tea. All right. So obviously you're both writers, which is why you're here. Do you have any sort of kind of weird writing ritual that you have to do before you write or while you're writing? You know, like does the light have like a certain light have to be on, or do you have to have a cup of tea, anything weird like that? Carrie, do you want to go first?
I don't have any rituals per se, but there are some things that I like that help. I listen to music when I write. And there are times where if I'm not listening to the right music, I can't write. And, you know, sometimes I'll be listening to one thing and then I need to turn on the ambient. If I'm writing something in a period, in a historical period, or with a certain atmosphere, the closer I can get to listening to something that fits that atmosphere, the easier it is. So that's probably the biggest thing, is I have to have something to distract the list making part of my brain. That's how I describe it. If I don't have something kind of distracting the back side of my brain, I will spend the entire time worrying if I left the stove on or wondering when I'm going to do laundry.
Yeah.
So I have to shut that down, and that's how I do it. A couple of years ago, I started writing with colored pens. So I'll often do my outlining and brainstorming and things longhand in a notebook. You know, I don't really necessarily draft that way. But kind of out of the blue, I started using colored pens and I really like it. It doesn't make any sense, but it just makes me happy writing with colored pens. So I always make sure to have 6 or 7 different colors on hand, just because it makes me happy. And anything you can do to make this gig just a little bit easier is great.
Yeah,
that's very true. You got to find the little pieces of joy to keep you going.
Yeah. I just imagine it would make the page look so cheerful, you know? Yeah. And this is a random question before I ask you what your potentially weird writing quirk is. Did either of you try, like when the Comic Sans phenomenon thing started, did either of you try that?
I heard about that, and it's not very hard to change your font to Comic Sans, or it was Comic Sans or some whatever it was. I never did it. I don't know why. It felt somehow like it was a lot more work than just changing the font setting of whatever I was working on. So yeah.
I think that the theory is that it would turn off your internal editor because it's such a friendly font. It's like, oh, I'm not actually writing. I'm just having fun because it's Comic Sans. At this point, I've been using the same font to write for so many years that I think if I tried to change, something might break. Something might actually physically in my brain blow up. So I haven't tried that.
That might be your weird writing quirk that you don't know about, but you don't want to discover. Like, breaks your brain. Yeah, that's fair.
My internal editor is kind of not on call all that often anyway. Like I'll write a paragraph and go back and read it, and it's almost like unrecognizable from what I was trying to do at the time. And then I have to be, all right, well, this sentence, none of these words are spelled right or the right words, so I need to go back and think this through. So my flow is pretty unsupervised anyway. I think even without Comic Sans.
Probably helpful, I guess. I can imagine there's probably lots of writers where it's a little overactive and it's hard to actually make any progress because you're too busy editing yourself. So yeah. So what about you, Brian? Any weird things you have to do, or?
This wasn't a permanent part of my routine, but it was the way that I finished Fury of a Demon, and it went on for at least a few months last summer and fall. So I would wake up really early in the morning, and I would exercise until I thought I was going to throw up. I would just do burpees until I was going to pass out. And I was sort of, I've been working on this trilogy for a while, and I was starting to my energy was starting to wane. So I'm just going to try to wake myself up fully. So I would do that. And then I would take a freezing cold shower until I thought that I was going to die, and then drink a bunch of coffee. And then I would start writing. So I'd wake up at 4, but by 4:30, I'd shocked all the different parts of my physical body that I could. And it worked pretty well for a while, actually. And then I think I turned in my last round of edits to my editor. And the next morning I was like, well, I'm not going to keep on doing that. That was ridiculous. So
yeah.
And that was the last of it. So I think it's the emergency mode. And also when it's summer, we have just a swamp cooler or an evaporative cooler. So the house is always a little bit hot. So a freezing cold shower is not the worst thing to do.
Yeah. Yeah. Summer's the only time a cold shower. So that sounds pretty nice, actually.
Exactly. Yeah. By the time I turned the edits in, fall was coming. I was I'm not taking a freezing cold shower at 4:30 in the morning. Nothing is worth that.
Yeah. Sounds awful.
Yeah.
Yes. All right. Well, I'm glad you're not, because you were saying all that. I was like, this just sounds like torture. What do you do, Brian?
Yeah. People on Twitter were asking me am I a serial killer and how many dead bodies are buried in my basement for doing that, which I thought was strong, but
yeah. I was gonna say I wouldn't go that far. That is a little too strong.
Maybe a little bit of self-torture, but it got it done. So
yeah, that's the important part. All right, last question. If you were gonna write, if there's a genre that you haven't written yet, you would like to, what's the top of your list of genres to maybe dive into at some point? Brian, we'll go back and start with you.
Well, I feel all I've ever written is fantasy. So even inside of fantasy, I feel there's stuff I want to try. I wrote a series where magic is poorly understood, to say the least. There's only a handful of people who even have a small grasp. So even the idea of writing fantasy with a very rigid magic system, or known magic system is appealing to me. But I also think definitely something in the sci-fi realm, because I did, a fantasy world in the traditional sense. There's no spaceships or laser guns, and there's so many times where I feel I just wish that someone would have a laser gun in this scenario. And even I introduced airships just to have one a better way for characters to get around in the world, and also just because they're cool. So yeah, I feel like sci-fi is very appealing, and even because I've never really tried to write anything of any significant length in the real world. So just writing a book where I can reference Obama is this sort of thrilling cushion that I've never really been able to enjoy. So whether it's mystery or post-apocalyptic or thriller, just it being in Earth where I can make references to things that everyone will understand is an appealing prospect. So
yeah,
that could be fun. But fantasy is also, I don't know, I feel unlike Carrie, who has so many books that it's mind-boggling, I've only had 3. So there's I feel I've done very little. So almost everything seems exciting to me.
All right. Yes, Carrie, as the person who has all these books.
Yeah, I'm trying to think what genres haven't I actually written?
You're the opposite of me.
So I have not written novel-length space opera. Okay. I've written space opera short stories, but I think it's a very different prospect writing, and I'm talking the big interstellar, Martians Abroad in particular was kind of the near Earth kind of science fiction, which is a little different than the big interstellar, faster than light travel empires kind of space opera. And I love reading it. A lot of my favorite books, C.J. Cher's Merchanter Union Universe, James S.A. Corey's Expanse. It's one of my favorite things to read, but I have not ever tackled it at novel length. And I've got the idea, I've got the thing that I'm kind of poking around with, but I haven't actually written it yet. So yeah, definitely that's top of my list.
Okay. Well, I guess we'll keep our eyes peeled for Carrie Vaughn's, now I can't even think of the right word. Space opera, there we go. I don't know why that.
Don't hold your breath, it's going to be a little while.
All right, we'll wait very patiently for it. All right, well, that's the end of my icebreakers. So now we're gonna get into the real stuff. So like I said, we are here because Brian finished his first trilogy, and this is it, Fury's Demon. Brian, how does it feel to have finished the trilogy?
Oh my, well, I always say the same thing. So there's like 3 versions of finishing it. There's the first time I finished like the draft and just wrote the ending. And that was a while ago, actually. The way publishing works, it was like pre-COVID. So I was writing at a bar and I started crying immediately. And like in an unexpected fashion that was sort of embarrassing. I think the waiters thought that I'd like been dumped or like some kind of family member had died because I was so suddenly very upset and like having a hard time reining in my emotions. And then there was like another version of that very much during COVID where I just sort of handed in my final edits and I was like, I can't touch this ever again. And I cried again then. I was ready for it and I was in the privacy of my own home. So it was like slightly more dignified maybe.
Yeah.
And then there's this one when it's finally out in the world, which is, it feels strange because the way publishing works, I've been done with it. Like my part of it has been done for quite some time. And I've caught myself almost accidentally tweeting about a plot point that's in the second book that I think is in the second book that's actually in the third book, and like having to not like spoil things by accident for people. So it's like bittersweet, I think is probably what most people would say when they finish a thing. But yeah, I'll look back on all this time finally and I'll always remember the characters. There's characters who when I started the series, I hadn't even conceived, and now they're like this indelible mark in my like head of what I'll always wonder like what Felgor would say in this situation and stuff like that. So that's been really cool. But yeah, it's a strange feeling.
Yeah. Well, go ahead, Carrie.
Oh, I was just writing a series is such a strange thing, and I was going to ask, was there anything unexpected that happened? Like, did you have the whole thing mapped out, or did you always mean for it to be a trilogy, or did something unexpected happen? What were the challenges of writing a whole trilogy versus writing a single novel?
Well, my biggest thing, the second book was very hard on me, and I think I wrote the first one. I never really thought anything would come out of it, to be honest, but then I had like a rough idea for what would happen in the second one, and thinking it could be like a second and a third book depending on how things went. But it turned out that my idea for what could happen in the second book was not a good idea at all, so I had to like scrap all of it and kind of like readjust things. So I feel like that was unexpected. But I think another thing that happened to me was that the main character is this very kind of like sarcastic, emotionally closed off guy, and he's a fun character to write because he's you get the sense of his voice, and he's just sort of never like taking the world very seriously. But one thing that surprised me throughout the series is that my favorite character became someone I always like Silas Bershad as the main character, but one of my favorite people to write is almost the opposite of him. He's this very vulnerable, almost innocent person who wants to like, his heart is just like open to the world. And by the time the third book came through, writing someone like that was a whole lot of fun. Whereas I think when I started him, I was a lot more uncomfortable writing a character like that. It was more fun to make sarcastic jokes and have this sort of like rugged warrior person, and this sort of, open-hearted medic type guy wound up being my favorite character to write towards the end. So I didn't see that coming really.
Carrie, did you kind of have similar experiences like that in your early days of writing? Is surprising?
Yeah. It's I'm not a natural series writer in some ways. Like I'm not a particular reader of series. And so the Kitty series ended up being 14 novels. Mm-hmm. So number one surprise was that the series ended up being 14 novels. And number two surprise was how hard it is to keep track of your own stuff. Like, I think when I was starting out, I would hear, like Stephen King in particular would talk about not remembering writing certain books and things like that. And I just thought that was ridiculous. How could you forget something that you wrote? Well, it turns out like writing novel 10 or 11, it's like, wait a minute, how many times have these two characters encountered each other? Like, what is going on here? So keeping track of the details in your own head, I think that surprised me is just because the things that you think you need to remember are never the things that you actually need to remember later on. Like I would be writing the later book and suddenly hit on some kind of information that I needed to know. It's totally unexpected. Like I didn't think we'd be running into that character again. So now I have to go back and remember which book that character first showed up in and, make sure the descriptions are consistent. So in some ways it's, there's a lot of housekeeping that I think I wasn't expecting. Yeah, keep a series Bible, but even then your series Bible isn't going to have all of the information that you need.
Yeah, so
And you just have to deal with it. It's just inevitable.
But yeah, I've been so curious to ask you because I feel like, I just wrote a trilogy, and I feel like even when I finished it was this big like void in my life, and your series was so much longer because it's complete, right? Like you're barring like spinoffs or whatever. So like I am so curious how that felt to finish the series like that long. That must have occupied like so much of your life, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, well, yeah. Yeah, I mean, from when I like wrote the first novel to when the last novel came out, something like 12 or 13 years. Mm-hmm. And I finished it the way I wanted to finish it. So I kind of didn't have a lot of those bittersweet, like I kept getting asked, well, are you sad? You must be really sad. And I was actually really proud of it. I was proud that I got the series to where it was. I had an endpoint in mind, and I got to that endpoint, and I wrapped it up the way that I wanted to. And not everybody gets a chance to do that. There's sort of endless stories of authors who don't get to finish their series for whatever reason. And I kind of did everything I wanted to do. I'm still doing spinoffs. I mean, you mentioned spinoffs. I still, those characters are still with me. But it's kind of freeing now because I get to write about them on when I want to, not on the publishing schedule. And that urban fantasy publishing schedule, 10 years ago was like 2 books a year.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I have a friend who was writing 3 books a year in her series, and that is an unsustainable pace. So it was kind of nice to not be doing that anymore as well. But yeah, the characters are still there. I know what happens to them. I get them out and play with them every now and then. I had a short story collection come out last year featuring Kitty and other characters and things. So in a way, it's kind of like finishing a degree, I guess would maybe be the parallel I would think of. Yeah, it's a little sad to leave, but on the other hand, I did it. I met the goal. I can go back for reunions when I want to. But yeah, it was big. It felt like a really big accomplishment, and I was also happy to move on to other things.
Yeah.
So I bet you're getting asked a lot if you have plans to revisit that world. What is next for you?
Yes, that question does tend to come up.
Yeah, people never stop asking that.
I'm sure you got it all the time too. Yeah, I'm working on new stuff. What I always say now is there's irons in the fire, but they're very preliminary irons, so it's hard to speak on them because one, I'm notorious for the first draft of anything being unrecognizable when you look at the second. So if I say anything, it could wind up just being completely different. And then there's sort of a few different things. I don't know what will come up with it, but there'll be swords and people talking around campfires most likely. Even if it's a science fiction thing, I'll probably still put swords and campfires in it because I'm not going to go that far astray from my roots.
Dune is swords and campfires, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. That's been in sci-fi since day one, so it's no big deal. But I do find it very well. It's because it's been a while since I had the crushing deadline, and I feel like there's this freeing thing of I started this morning I was writing a scene that's just garbage. It's terrible, and I'll have to delete it and forget it, but I don't care. I'm going to get to eat dinner and just move on. And then during deadline, though, you write a scene that's terrible in the morning and you have to fix it by the time the day is over because you have to fix some other scene the next day. And so this terrible crunch of having to get everything right on a timeline is gone. And I feel like I'm trying to enjoy that piece and let myself write just horrific things. But I think my process is much more about writing 5 versions of a scene that are terrible, and the 6th one is pretty good, and then I kind of go from there. It's not efficient.
That's all right. No one said you have to be efficient, except for when you're on deadline.
Oh, when you're on deadline, yeah.
Then maybe yes. Yeah. Carrie, I was curious about, you were saying, back when you were writing the earlier Kitty novels and you were expected to do 2 a year, was that just kind of because of like the publishing trend, like urban fantasies were such a big thing and they wanted to pump them out quickly, or yeah, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, there was that stretch between, I want to say about 2004 and maybe 2012, where urban fantasy was just huge. It was all vampires. A lot of people made fun of the covers. There were all these covers of like women in leather with their backs looking over their shoulders, holding guns or swords or something.
Yeah.
And the readership was voracious. The other thing is they were all mostly coming out in mass market paperback, which has a faster turnaround, I think a shorter shelf life and a faster turnaround. So one of the ways that the publishers wanted to promote that was to always have a book on the shelf. Mm-hmm. Get the next one on the shelf before the bookstore would pull the previous one. And so, yeah, it just got, it was just about keeping your name out there and keeping the books out there. And the publishers really wanted that to happen. And people bought them. I mean, that readership was just eating it up. Mm-hmm. And you want to fulfill that, your readers want books, you want to give them books. So the other thing about urban fantasy, I feel like I have to point out, is that they're shorter. They weren't big doorstopper fantasies. All of my friends who write big doorstopper fantasy will kind of look at me like, how are you writing 2 books a year? And it's like, well, because my books are half the size of the big doorstopper fantasy. So that made it a little easier.
Yeah.
It was just.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, that was just the trend. It was just the way that trend went.
Mm-hmm. I was going to ask if you had the experience where you crunch to get a book done in 6 months or whatever it is, and then like halfway through the day it came out, someone emails you asking when you're going to finish the next one because they finished it in like a matter of hours.
Every time. Yeah, they were like the same day. Oh, I finished reading your book.
Yeah, it's like I tortured myself for months to get that out. So yeah, it's going to be a minute to get the next one. But that was one of those things that surprised me, and it both feels like really good in some ways, and then it's also like this like morally crushing thing that someone. It's like great that they can get through it that fast, and it's like I need at least a little bit of time before I can get back.
And I'm a slow reader. Like I don't know about you guys, but I am not a fast reader, and I don't know where that comes from, but I like to sit and enjoy and sink into a book. I read every single word. I'll sit and think about it. So for whatever reason, I'm not a fast reader. So it takes me a while to get through books. So when my very first book came out, Kitty in the Midnight Hour, I had ARCs. Like they mailed me ARCs, and I was so excited. I was going to a birthday party that same day. So I brought the ARC to a birthday party, and one of our friends took it out of my hand, went into the next room. She read it in 2.5 hours.
Like at the party.
And came back out and was like, I'm done now. And I'm like, what did you just do? And like, I didn't believe it, but she said, she explained everything that happened in the book. And I'm like, oh my God, she read my book in 2.5 hours, which was great because she sat there then and told everybody that she really liked it and thought it was really good and that everybody should go out and read it. And she became a big, advocate for me, which was fantastic. But to this day, I'm like, how? I don't understand. But there are people who can read that fast. It will never fail to amaze me.
I'm in the same boat. I'm a very slow reader. Like I've read maybe 1 book in a day, maybe 2, but it was sort of one of those days where it was like I was stuck somewhere where there was like actually nothing else to do. It takes me quite a while to read books. So yeah, when someone can like plow through something that fast and remember everything and like pull different scenes, it's not in my repertoire. I wish I was a faster reader because I love reading books, but it takes me a minute to get through them.
Yeah, Brian and I were talking, I think further before you got here, Carrie, that I'm kind of like right in the middle. I'm not a super fast reader, but I'm not a super slow reader. And I feel so bad for the slow readers because that has to be just so tough, being like, there's so many good books out there that I want to read, and I read so slow. Like, am I gonna, we're never gonna read all the books we want, obviously, but
So the other one that happens is when the new book comes out, there are people who will read every book in the series over again because they want to have everything fresh in their minds. So, book 10 comes out, they read 9 books and then read book 10, and then 11 comes out, they read 10 books and then 11. and Brian, you'll probably, I don't know if you've gotten this yet, but yeah, you'll have readers who read the first two books over again because they want it really fresh in their minds. And that's fantastic too. But also it's like, I don't have time. I have a dream that one of these years I'm just going to take off an entire year to reread Stephen Erickson's Malazan Book of the Fallen, which I loved, but like none of it is in my head anymore because it's so dense and there's so much going on. And it's like 8 books and they're all like 3 inches thick. Yeah. But I would love to read that series like from beginning to end now that it's all out. I don't know when I'm going to do that because it's going to take me a long time.
Yeah, it would take me like a year or two. And yeah, I feel like I'm also in the same way it takes me a long time to read books. I don't have like the recall. Like some of my favorite books, I couldn't really tell you what happened in them, which is a weird thing where I wonder if I'm like slowly succumbing to some kind of dementia. But like I remember the way I felt reading them, but I couldn't pull like I couldn't write out the like arc of the plot for some of my favorite books, which is alarming, I guess. But yeah.
I'm kind of the same way. I wouldn't worry too much unless we're just both looking into mental insanity or something.
Unless I'm like winding up like wandering a grocery store without pants on and I don't know how I got there. That's more of the thing I should be worried about. That hasn't happened. So I think
if that happens, then we'll worry. Then we'll have to send you to a hospital or something. But yeah, speaking of the size of books, I mean, yeah, Brian, I think all of yours are relatively a similar length, all the books in the trilogy, correct? Yeah. So
yeah, they got a little bit longer as they went, but not by like a crazy degree. And I feel like, in terms of fantasy, I feel like it's like kind of almost leaning towards short.
I would say you're a little on the short side, but I kind of appreciate it because, I mean, not that big, giant doorstopper books can't be fantastic, but just due to the sheer volume, I don't know if you guys feel this way too, but all the books that you want to read, it makes it so much harder for me to want to pick up those big books because I'm like, I have so many other books and that will take so long. And I could read like 3 books in the time I read that. Yeah. So I personally appreciate that your books are kind of smaller, a little more manageable. From a writing standpoint, did you find that was hard to try and like keep everything to a sort of, I don't know if you were aiming for a certain length of book, but was it hard to sort of keep that manageable length of book with all the sort of world building stuff you were putting in there? Or did it kind of work out naturally that you got everything in you wanted, but they weren't massive?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I think the like manuscript I turned into my agent, like that I submitted to my agent was like 120,000 words. And I feel like we did a bunch of edits for a year and it bloated to like 160,000 words. And then we cut it back down. She's like, this is all great, but now just make it like 20,000 words shorter or whatever it was. I think they all come in around like between 130 and 140. And I think it like that's sort of been the process. It's like it comes in almost short for epic fantasy, and then I bloat it through rewrites and just doing stupid things and making mistakes, and then sort of like trim it back down. So it's always felt like pretty like natural, I guess, for lack of a better word. And I think because I do multiple perspectives and like you can get yourself into hot water because you need 2 people to be in the same place eventually, and then you realize that you need an extra 20,000 words to get them there, but you don't have an extra 20,000 words, so you have to figure something out. Like an airship, for example, would be a great way to kill 20,000 words. But yeah, I think I'm like, for all of these books, I've probably written 300 and 400,000 words, but it's not of like side quests that like huge plot lines that got cut. It's me rewriting the same scene over and over and over again. So the story stays pretty like contained. I just torture myself through trying it 100 different ways. So.
Carrie, do you find that you're a fairly moderate length writer, or do you kind of have to be reined back sometimes?
I write short, and I'm actually working on that. None of my published books is longer than 100,000 words, which, part of that is just the genres I write in, but also I don't write long. and I figured it out at one point. Part of what I think happens is I like to know the ending before I start. So because I like to know where I'm going. It makes everything else just a little bit easier, how to get to from point A to point B. But because of that, sometimes I charge towards the end. I know where I'm going, so let's get there. And then I have to back up and expand things a little bit. Yeah, I've written a couple of things that are longer than 100,000 words, but nothing that's been published. So someday in my career, I will publish a novel that's longer than 100,000 words, but my natural length seems to be right at about 75, 80. I always expand on the rewrite. I always add about 10, 15,000 words on the rewrite. So that tells you how short my very first drafts come in is, I've had first drafts that are like barely novel length. And then it's like, okay, let's figure out what I missed. What did I leave out that I have to now go back and explain or flesh out, which I think is it sounds, of course it feels doable for me. It feels more natural for me, but the thought of like having to cut 20,000 words sounds really hard. And I've never had to do that. So
yeah.
Because I've been told to cut for 20,000 words, and I feel like, but I had so much more. And so my agent was funny. The advice she gave me was like, cut 2 sentences out of each page, which was actually way easier than cutting like a whole scene. And then she was like, and you can cut one of these 4 scenes, and all the I looked at them, I was like, those are all vital scenes, I can't cut one of those. She's like, yeah, you can, just be creative. My agent is very no nonsense, like, you can cut them, just move, like, write down the things that are important and move it to another scene that you can do in like, a few sentences instead of paragraphs. Is like, no, that is extremely accurate. All right, here we go, and then we're done.
Yeah, that's what they mean by kill your darlings, that thing that you think you absolutely need, and it turns out no, actually you take it out and nothing changes. It's like, oh man.
Exactly.
And I've done that on short stories. Like, I need to cut 500 words out of a short story because of the magazine guidelines or whatever. And you don't do it by cutting scenes, you do it by cutting words. He sat down, cut out down, he just sat. And and you do that, and all of a sudden you're cutting like 30 words per page on 10 pages, and all of a sudden that's 300 words gone just by making your prose that much tighter.
Exactly.
At the prose level, and I think that's a really valuable thing to learn. Just making your prose tight, learning. You can internalize that, learning like what words do you not really need. It turns out you don't really need all those adverbs. There's stuff you don't need. You don't need a lot of the dialogue tags that you think you need. And it sounds really mechanical, but when I read before and after that kind of edit, the after is so good. It just reads so clean and so smooth. So that's something I really try to work on. Because it's just amazing. You would think it wouldn't make that much difference, but it really does.
Yeah, that was definitely like a very nice. I got the sort of novel length tip is cut like 2 sentences out of each page. But like for short stories, it comes down to the word thing. And I feel like cutting from a short story. I've never written a good short story in my life, but I feel like it's like the same principle, but almost harder. I think short stories are way harder than novels. Maybe just because I've never written one that I've thought was remotely like worth sharing to anyone.
There's a goal for you.
Maybe. I mean, who knows? Yeah, I don't know if short fiction is going to be my jam, but yeah, just the idea that you can like when I was going back through the first time my agent said that, and she was like, if you would be surprised how many times you got 2 sentences together and they mean the same thing, and like whatever value was in the second one you can get into the first one in a word, and vice versa. I was astounded by how often I did that and just wrote the same thing twice. And like sat down's like a great example. It's like you're good with just the first word.
Cool. So we're like coming up on our rough end goal time. So first of all, really quick, I forgot to mention this at the beginning, but if you want to order either of these books, either of them, you can do so at our website, which is crowded-bookshelf.com. There is a menu at the top. You click on buy books. You can order print books. You can also order an audiobook. Well, Brian, no, you're not getting an audiobook for this one, are you?
Yeah, there's no audio for this guy coming around. Yeah. So
okay.
just
And Carrie, is there an audio question?
Yes,
cool.
There is.
All right, well then you can get an audiobook if that's what you're into for Carrie's book and for the earlier books at least.
Yeah, the first 2 have audio.
Well, see, if you haven't started the series, you can start there. And then you can also get ebooks. So whatever book format you want to try and find, they're all there. You can purchase some. And for print books, at least, these 2 amazing authors have agreed to sign the first 20 copies purchased. There are still copies available that you can get signed. So if you want a signed copy, go order those books. And also really quick, this has been a great conversation, but we should maybe talk a little bit about the actual books. So in your own words, Brian, how would you describe sort of the series for anyone out there that hasn't maybe began it, and then sort of what Fury of the Demon is kind of all about?
Okay, so the elevator pitch I always use for the series is that it's an answer to the question of what happens if you take a world and just dump a bunch of dragons in it, and then take like the grumpiest version of Wolverine from the comics and force him to become a dragon slayer against his will. So that's kind of the starting off point. And with Fury of a Demon, it's the third book, so there's been a lot of drama. There's been a lot of globe trotting and battles and fights and stuff like that. But it's been with characters who, some of them have never met each other. Some of them kind of met each other and dispersed. And the third book is kind of everyone all jammed into one prolonged piece of jungle warfare. It's a very kind of contained thing. And one of my favorite parts about it was writing scenes where two characters who had never met before are kind of together for the entire book. So it's yeah, I guess I don't have an end to that sentence.
It's okay.
Can I actually butt in with a question there? Because I wanted to ask you about your influences and things, because you do have such a visceral world with, not just the warfare and not just the really gritty fantasy world warfare, but the focus on the soldiers on the ground, like in the middle of it, not the top down view that we often get in epic fantasy. So I wondered, do you have influences? I got a little bit of a vibe of Stephen Erickson, and also a little bit of a vibe of Glenn Cook's Black Company
Black Company
series. So I was wondering, were they influences? Do you have any other influences that you drew on, or that
yeah. No, I feel like definitely Glenn Cook. So my sort of I read fantasy as a kid and then stepped away from it for a long time. I was reading English majory stuff, and then came back to it. And I feel like a lot of people, it was before the HBO show, but I started reading, Song of Ice and Fire. And I think that that's sort of the gateway into the people Glenn Cook and Joe Abercrombie, who are doing it's not so much the higher level stuff. It's people just sort of stuck in the mud trying to figure things out in these little things. So I feel like it's actually, it's Glenn Cook and Joe Abercrombie were the two biggest influences. Okay. That kind of made me want to be I want to write a story about the stuff on the ground, not a huge amount of palace intrigue and a general kind of moving his troops around, but what it's like to be sitting in a pile of mud the day before a battle, and hanging out with your friends, and you're kind of nervous and really cold and kind of wish you'd maybe made some different decisions in your life. And they both do that so well. So capturing that kind of feeling was really interesting to me. So those are the biggest ones.
Cool.
All right, Carrie, really quick for you. This is the summary of Questland.
It is about a high-tech LARP that goes horribly, horribly wrong, and the literature professor who has to save the day. Because I too spent a lot of time studying English in academia.
I do like the right about professor. They're the hero.
Write about what you know.
Exactly.
And I love, so I was starting to read it today, and I love how fast you got from an office in CU Boulder to the St. Julian Hotel, which I love.
Yeah.
I stuff all the time, to this crazy island full of mercenaries and magic. I was you did this so quickly, and I'm here for it. So.
And there's 2/3 of the way through, there's a Baudrillard reference that nobody has called me on. I keep thinking somebody's going to go, what the hell were you doing there? And nobody's called me on it yet. So.
Sorry, not sorry. I do what I want.
Right.
I'm the author. I'll do what I want.
Yeah, it's what's the most obscure? So I pile in a lot of, shall we say, tropes or Easter eggs or callbacks, whatever you want to call them. And I'm not sure what the most obscure one is, but I'm waiting for somebody to tell me.
Brian, do you do Easter eggs in any of your books? I suppose it might be a little harder if, like you said, you're not writing in the real world.
Yeah, it's second world. I'm trying to think. I can't remember what it was, but when my editor first gave me edits, it was more of like an inside joke that happened inside one part of the story, and then there's like a callback to it, and it is sort of a callback to some of it. It would be cooler, this would be a cooler story if I remembered the details, but I cannot remember them. But that was one of my like top publishing experiences, when he like came back and he like acknowledged the joke and then made it like a little bit better. And I'm like, oh my god, it's crazy that someone actually like even read this book at all and then got this like weird thing that I was doing. So again, be cool. I should try to remember what that was before I tell that story again, but I can't remember.
That's all right. What about creating this world in this trilogy that you have made? What was your favorite part of creating it, this world?
So I start with not a whole lot of planning, if that isn't clear. So I start with like a scene usually that I think would be cool and just sort of like blow it out from there. And I feel like there have been parts, especially in the third book, where honestly, I think a lot of it was just sort of luck, or like you've thrown so many things out there that there's just ways to tie it together that actually wind up working like I thought of it that way the entire time. So that was really fun with the third book, where some of those things started kind of falling my way. In the second book, none of those things fell my way with my sort of like very rough kind of planning, and it was a stressful time. But with the third one, I think I had a better sense of like the world and how it all worked. And so I was able to like tie off a lot of loose ends in a way that felt really, really good and natural, but weren't actually planned. So I don't know.
Sometimes that's the best though. Like you just kind of throw stuff out there, and you're like, well, we'll see what sticks. And
and I had the kind of like rough vision of the ending, like a few scenes planned, like conceptualized from the very beginning, but wasn't sure what was going to happen in them. And then kind of by the time I got there to end them, I knew exactly kind of what to do, and it came very naturally. And then I started crying in a public place. So,
as you do sometimes.
As you do.
Yeah, it happens. It happens. Do you find what book of the trilogy was there one that was easier to write? Just like sort of like you said, you kind of threw things out. Some things went your way, some things didn't. Did one book was one easier to write because everything kind of lined up, or?
Yeah, I think the third one was probably the easiest to write. And part of it, I think, is just like you have a lack of options by the time, because you like winnowed your options down as the story has gone on. I feel like you have the most options on the first page, but I didn't know that when I was writing the first page. So like I really felt my lack of options in a bad way in the second one, and I really felt it in a good way with the third one. So I feel like I feel like the third one was in some ways kind of the most fun to write, just because once you like make it so like, this is how this character's gonna end, then that's just how it's going to end. And there's freedom in not being able to try to rewrite a scene 15 times. Like it's just going to be the one time, and that'll be it. So.
That is kind of you don't have any options, and just like, well, we're just going to be happy with this.
Yeah, this is it. But it all worked out. I like the way all the characters ended up, so that was fun, because I feel like you can also, I guess you could end up in the other way, where it's like you're stuck and you have to end it this way, but you didn't want to. You wanted something else, but it's just not feasible. But that didn't happen for me, luckily. I think it really was just luck in a lot of ways. Like I don't do enough planning to say that I achieved that on purpose. I think it just sort of fell out there.
Hey, you achieved it regardless of how you got there.
There we go.
All right. Well, really quick, I put it in the chat, but I'll say it just in case no one's looking at the chat. We're going to do a short Q&A when we're done with our discussion. So if you have any questions, feel free to just put them in the general chat to everyone, or you can use the Q&A feature that Zoom webinar has, and we'll ask some questions from you guys to the authors. So don't be shy, and any questions or comments, whatever nice things you'd like to say, don't be shy. All right, well, I don't know, this has been a really good discussion. I don't really know what else. Oh, this is a random question that I thought of early on in the day. What video games were you watching your brother play that sort of sparked your love of fantasy, Brian? I was curious.
Okay, so the first one I remember watching him play was Resident Evil, and I was terrified and too young to watch my brother play Resident Evil. It gave me nightmares. I don't know if it was Resident Evil or The Exorcist, but for one of those, I had to like move back into his room, and I just like, got in my own room, and I was super excited, and then I had to go and sleep in his room because I was so scared. But the one that really kind of made me like realize how big you could make a world was Final Fantasy VII. And I think I was still pretty little. And so I'd have to he'd have to explain the story to me and explain what was going on. And I feel like I'd ask him all sorts of annoying questions because I wanted more, and I would read the instruction manual and stuff like that over and over and over again. So yeah, Final Fantasy VII and StarCraft, which isn't a game about lore, but it came with this big book explaining all the different factions. And so I was always asking him stuff about that when he was trying to do it's more of chess almost. So it's not important what the different characters stand for, but I was very invested in that kind of thing. So
yeah. Well, I just read that and it just took me back to when I was growing up, because I was that way with my brother. He would be the one to play video games and I would just sit there and watch. And then when he wasn't playing, I was like, okay, well now I know how to play, so I'll go play, and I would do it myself. So that just was I probably do that too.
Yeah. What games were you watching?
Zelda is the biggest one that I remember watching, and I still am a hardcore Zelda fan to this day. So it really stuck.
Yeah, that was definitely one I watched with him too. Yeah, Ocarina of Time, I think, was the one. Yeah, for sure.
Ocarina of Time's where it's at, for sure.
Yeah.
So, Carrie, do you have what's your origin story for becoming a writer?
Oh, I started really young, and I mean, my whole family are readers, so the house was filled with books and science fiction, in particular, science fiction and fantasy. We watched Star Trek reruns. I kind of grew up at that magical time where Battlestar Galactica, the original Battlestar Galactica, and Buck Rogers and Greatest American Hero, and all those weird animated superhero films the super cartoons the Super Friends, Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. And I just ate it all up. And I think the very first story I ever wrote, and this will tell you a lot about my writing process, because this was going on even then. I had a horse book phase where I stopped reading science fiction and I just read all the horse books. I read all of Marguerite Henry. I read every single thing Walter Farley ever wrote, the entire Black Stallion series. The thing about the Black Stallion, at least the first book, he sort of tries to work girls in later on, but there's no girls in that series.
It's bored on the
there are none.
Kind of thing,
It's all boys, it's all guys and men, and even the horses are all, there's one book, the Black Stallion's Filly, and that's the only girl horse in the entire thing. So my first story was basically Black Stallion gender flipped fanfic. Where I wrote a horse story where the horse was a girl and everybody were girls. So yes, that's how I got into it, is I wasn't seeing the stories I wanted, so I had to write my own. And I went on from there.
All right. I love it. You were writing well, maybe not totally, but you were writing gender bent novels before they were a thing.
Yeah, apparently.
You're the OG. You're the OG, Carrie.
Exactly. The OG gender bending fanfic.
Yep. Well, you're I had a horse phase, and I was just yep, we all had a horse phase.
Yeah.
We all had a horse phase.
We all did.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. All right. Well, we did have a question come in. Well, first of all, we have a comment too. Steve says, Bershad, marry me. And then he says, would you invite Bershad to your wedding? And if so, would you have an open bar?
I mean, I feel like that's one of those things where you'll get a story out of it, but he'll drink the entirety of your open bar and he'll potentially ruin your wedding. It depends on how rowdy you want things to get.
Yeah.
Because it would get fairly rowdy, especially if Felgor was there too. He'd steal all your stuff and it would be a problem. So
yeah, but like I said before the event started, I didn't get too far into the book, but even just the first couple of chapters, I was yeah, this is a rough group of guys. They're living rough and they're calloused and just rough. So yeah, I could see that. It'd just be a real rough and tumble wedding if they were there.
Yeah, he doesn't respect the ceremony of weddings. I wouldn't think. Actually, now that I think about it, there are no weddings in the entire trilogy. I don't even know. People get married. Wait, is that true? That is very close to being true. There's no on-screen weddings. And to be honest, I didn't think through that much even how that would go. So it'd be a foreign event to him and he would probably cause trouble.
Sounds great. Yeah. All right. Are there any other questions out there in webinar land or on Facebook?
Yeah, I think there's in the Zoom Q&A, it looks like we've got.
Oh, there is. I forgot.
There's a little red.
I was expecting it to pop up, but yeah, I forgot it says notification. Okay.
Yeah, and it seems like Zoom changes every time I use it. So I don't know if that's just me.
Yeah, are they trying to make it easier on us or just keep us on our toes? Like it's never going to be the same. Every Zoom call will be slightly different.
I feel like by making it, they're trying to make it easier, but they're not like updating you in the appropriate way. So you just have to learn as you go, and then it just makes it harder, even though they're trying to make it easier for you. So
exactly,
you get an A for effort, Zoom. Okay. Question is, my first loss to COVID world, it was one day, was Carrie signing for the Immortal Conquistador. Have either of you experienced signing withdrawal?
I miss conventions. I usually do quite a few either science fiction conventions or pop culture conventions or whatever. So yeah, signings, just any face-to-face thing. Yeah, I'm kind of really missing, still really missing. I've been very grateful for all the virtual stuff because it's better than nothing, because I can still see your lovely faces and read people's comments, and there's some interaction is better than no interaction, which is what we would have without all of this. But yeah, I've actually got my first couple of in-person conventions scheduled. I've got one coming up this weekend, which it's going to be interesting. Masks are required, so we're all going to be walking around in masks, which once again, like that's better than not doing it at all. And if we weren't wearing masks, I wouldn't be doing it at all. But I think there's going to be a learning curve trying to get back into it. So I'm really curious to see how that's going to go. We'll get back to it someday. But yeah, right now it's like it's going to be different and it's going to be strange. But yeah, I've missed it. I've missed just hanging out.
Yeah, I feel like we were talking earlier, like my first book came out pre-COVID, but the other two has been, the digital Zooms has been my world. I only really got to go to two events. I did Denver Comic-Con, I did an event in Detroit, and then basically, everything sort of came down. And I really enjoyed those two events. I was extremely nervous about them. My social anxiety is high, so I was like, just all a tizzy, but it's really fun. It was really great to get to meet so many other writers and just people. So, but yeah, I feel like because I only got to experience a sliver of it, it's almost like the Zoom stuff is more normal to me now, or it's like the stuff I've done quite a bit more. But I'm looking forward to whenever it happens, getting to go back to a big con event. That they're really fun.
Yeah, it's definitely very different being in the same space. All right. A question from Dennis on Facebook is, will there be a Denny spinoff?
This is a classic question from Dennis, because he is a character in the books. He's a minor character, but he does play a big role in One Piece. Potentially. I'm not going to close any doors right now for a Dennis spinoff.
Right. Keeping it open. Keeping it ambiguous.
Yeah. I won't rule anything out.
Okay. All right. Another question from Steve. What is your number one advice to new writers? Brian, if you want to start, and then Carrie, we can jump to you.
Oh God, I feel like Carrie will have better things to say because I'm like blanking on it.
I mean, perspectives. Like, you're a new writer, so you have yours, and Carrie will have hers. They'll both be very good.
Yeah, I feel like there's like no shortage of advice for writers on the internet, because writers like to write about writing, and I think that it's one of those things where you like need to pick and choose what's going to work well for you. I think the thing that worked the best for me early on was I had this bus ride where I just was killing time in some ways, and it was a space to write something. It didn't matter whether it was good or bad. It just was a matter of kind of doing it, and then you get sort of better as you go to some degree. At least that was the hope. So I found that to be very useful for me. I wanted to do it, but having that kind of structure and space was super helpful to me.
What about you, Carrie?
Yeah. I sometimes worry that I'm starting to get into my curmudgeonly phase and that my advice is maybe not as helpful as it would have been earlier on, because I am, I did the math. I've been doing this for a while, which was kind of shocking because I still feel like I'm learning so much and I still feel kind of new to it sometimes. But I give the advice that most writers give, which is to write and write a lot. I think some people get really intimidated by other writers who post like these huge word counts. And I found that the word count, your daily word count isn't really important. I have a friend whose word count goal is 250 words a day, which it turns out is a couple of paragraphs. It's like a page. It's like a double spaced page, which doesn't sound like a lot. But if you do that every day for a year, you'll have 365 pages, which is a novel. So you can do it in little tiny chunks. And so that's one of my pieces of advice. Don't sit down and think, I'm going to write a novel today. It's like, no, you're not going to write a novel today. You're going to write a page. And then you're going to write the next page. And that's okay. It doesn't matter how long it takes you. It doesn't, just little baby steps. This is definitely a tortoise thing rather than a hare thing. And then the second piece is to read. Don't discount reading as something that can help your writing. And don't just read, but analyze what you read. If you read a book that you really hate, try to figure out why you hate it. What is the thing that turned you off? Where did this book go wrong for you? And then don't do that in your own work. But by the same token, if you have a book that you really love, try to figure out why. What is the thing that you love about it? And then bring that into your own writing as well. So it's just, you should be pulling everything in. It will just make your own work better and more fun.
I think that is really good advice. Like, of when you hate something, like think about why you hate it. Mm-hmm. I do that with movies a lot. When a movie is just like hot garbage, like think about why it's hot garbage and how you would make it better. And it's not as easy as it seems, like to take it like a terrible movie and sit down and like rewrite it so that it's not a terrible movie. But I think it is like a good exercise because it just forces you to kind of like put structure around your ability to fix just a broken ass scene or plot or movie or whatever.
And I think that's even better with a movie that is almost good but not quite. And those are the really tough ones where it's like I know I'm going to make some people angry, but Blade Runner 2049 was one that just kind of fell apart for me. Like it shouldn't have. There were so many beautiful things about it. The main character, Ryan Gosling's character, was so intriguing. So what went wrong? And looking at it, they switched main characters in the third act. Yeah. So Ryan Gosling's character never actually got a complete character arc because as soon as Deckard shows back up, as soon as he goes out and finds Deckard, it's like, oh, all of a sudden Deckard's the main character. So this movie switched main characters, which meant that neither character got a satisfying arc. And therefore I walked out of that movie being very unsatisfied. And that's like, oh, okay, don't do that. Don't leave your character arc hanging.
No, I totally agree with that. I feel like the first like third of that movie, I was like, I am so on board with this. I can't even see straight. And I like left and I was like, well, I'm not on board anymore. And I don't know why I'm so unhappy. Yeah. And I'm sure that there's a screenwriter who's not watching this, but like who wrote it, like where it is one sort of like arc. And like, I feel like I don't know that much about the movie business, but I know that there's usually a good version of the script that just didn't get made for any reason. So he's probably like, exactly. They switched main character.
Yeah. Well, and kind of going what you were saying, Carrie, as far as, like pay attention to something and why you don't like it. I think finding, either a movie or, something that already kind of exists and then using it as an exercise to make it better. I think that is probably a nice sort of way to take stress off people that are maybe trying to just get into writing and figure out sort of how to do it, and more, not necessarily like coming up with an idea, but the craft behind writing. I think that could be a really great stress-free way for them to sort of practice without having to have created the whole world on their own. But you're just given something that already exists, and you can, like you said, figure out what doesn't work, why doesn't it work, how to make it better, and you're honing your own skills to do that, and then you can apply it to your own work.
Yeah, and I feel like fan fiction is like kind of a divisive topic, but I think that, and I understand the people who fall on the side where they don't really like it for sometimes just legal reasons, other times other ones. But to my knowledge, nobody has ever made fan fiction of my stuff. But I think that kind of what you're saying, like there's value in it in the sense that you get a crutch or a helping hand, whatever you want to call it, in terms of like plot and world and characters. But that's kind of just the start. Sometimes you can still take a wonder, like Cyberpunk, you can take this wonderful world and still screw it up pretty badly if you just don't write the plot,
Yeah, I was thinking fan fiction earlier, so yeah, like glad you said it as well, because I like you said, I think it can be a divisive topic, but could also be, again, just that learning tool for someone.
Yeah, I like fan fiction. I've written fan fiction. I've written so much Skyrim fan fiction I can't even see straight. So,
I mean, I know Skyrim is very immersive, but in my head, it's kind of like, oh, fan fiction about a video game. I didn't think about that, but I suppose there is probably enough to.
It's pretty fun.
So
Yeah.
much. So much. You have no idea how much.
The only thing I
Fan
know,
fiction has been getting me through the pandemic. So
yeah,
This is the real cure to the pandemic. It's just delving into the fan fiction trope. So some of it is so good too and so creative. Like I really like fan fiction.
yeah. The only thing I know about Skyrim, because I would watch my brother and a friend play sometimes, and the only thing I know about Skyrim is that Lydia is sworn to carry your burdens.
She is.
Yeah.
She is. Yeah.
That's all I know for sure. So that and I'm really proud of it.
That could go anywhere for someone who hasn't played it, but that is
Yeah,
accurate.
right.
And she reminds you of it all the time.
All the time. Yeah. All right. I'm going to do one last quick shout out. If anyone has any other last minute questions, we're going to give you one last chance. But I'm also going to show off the books again because who doesn't want to look at them?
yay. They're so
Cover,
pretty.
yeah, your cover is beautiful. I love
Look
it.
at this. He's so
I love
intense.
it.
Oh, I have the UK version of my cover too.
Oh, yeah.
Which is different. Yeah, my UK and US ones are different. So it
Now
makes
it's
me look a lot more prolific than I actually am because there's six books that are all, it's just 3.
Yeah, right. It's like, oh yes, all these books. No, I was actually just in the UK, and I think for the most part, I feel that the UK generally has like better covers than the US does. The one exception I found was the cover for Rebecca Rowan versus Trail of Lightning. The UK cover was like very boring, and I was like, oh, no. So that's the only place so far the US was like earned points in cover design. Like, nah, they nailed it. Rebecca Rowan horse.
I have seen Twitter battles between people over whether they like the UK and the US covers better for my stuff. So I stay out of it. I like them both.
I think they're both.
No good can come of it.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think it's just cool to get to have 2 covers and to look like I've written way more books than I actually have. So I'm for it one way or another.
Yeah. Well, again, you can order both of these books now. You can order Brian's book, both the third and the first 2, if you haven't read the entire trilogy yet. And he will sign the first 20 copies of Fury of the Demon that are ordered. It was a paperback and a hardcover release. So if you want a paperback, you can order that. Or if you prefer hardcover versions, you can also order a hardcover version. And then Carrie's Questland has been out for a while, but this is the first you're hearing about it. You can order it as well. And she provided us with lovely signed book plates. So first 20 books will get a book plate. And again, the link, if you are interested in ordering, is crowded-bookshelf.com. Go to the buy books link and you can purchase it in whatever format you would like. But obviously only the print versions will be signed. All right, well, I haven't seen any other questions come in. I'm not missing anything. No. Okay. Well, then I would say that we can call that a night. I won't keep you for much longer. But thank you guys both so much for being here. This was a fantastic conversation. And I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, really fun.
Thank you for inviting me along.
Of course.
And congratulations, Brian.
Thank you. Congratulations to you. Yeah, I'm excited to finish Questland. You have me very intrigued. And I just finished the Project Hail Mary book, so I'm excited to dig into this one. It's exciting.
Cool. All right. Well, both of you, like I said, thank you so much for being here. Stay safe as we continue to move forward in this crazy world of ours. And hopefully one day soon we'll get to see you both in person and do this for real.
We can only hope.
Fingers crossed. 2022, maybe.
Knock on wood.
Yeah.
It's like
we might be,
I've been burned before.
Yeah, right. 2021 promised us that too. Now look where we're at. All right. Well, yes, this has been great. Thank you guys so much. And have a great rest of your night. Thank you to everyone who came and attended here in Zoom or on Facebook. You guys are all awesome. And happy reading.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.
Good night.